What happens to a child's brain when they grow up practicing for nuclear war, watch their president get assassinated, and learn that the world can change overnight? Does that child grow up privileged, or does that child grow up prepared? If you were born between 1946 and 1964, this isn't nostalgia. It's psychology. There's a generation that built highways, sent humans to the moon, marched for civil rights, protested a war, and watched their president get assassinated on live television all before they turned 30. And somehow, that same generation is now described as out of touch, rigid, privileged, unable to adapt. But here's the contradiction that nobody stops to examine. The people most criticized for being inflexible are the ones who lived through the most volatile decades in modern American history. That doesn't sound like privilege. That sounds like survival. And yet, decades later, the narrative hardened, that they had it easy, that everything was handed to them, the houses, the pensions, the stability. So before we judge, we need to understand the full architecture of the world they inherited and the one they built. So what actually happened? What shaped a generation of 76 million people into who they became? And why do so many of their behaviors, the ones that frustrate the people around them, make perfect psychological sense once you understand where they came from? You are not going to find a simple answer here, but you are going to find something more useful: understanding. The generation born between 1946 and 1964 didn't arrive into a peaceful world. They arrived into the aftermath of one. Their parents had survived an economic depression that erased entire family savings overnight, and a world war that took their friends, their brothers, their sense of safety. By the time the baby boomers were old enough to walk, they were already absorbing something invisible but permanent: the feeling that the world is unpredictable, and stability must be earned, protected, and never taken for granted. Psychologists call this intergenerational trauma transmission. You don't have to experience something directly for it to shape your nervous system. Children absorb the emotional residue of their parents. When a child grows up watching a parent flinch at financial conversation, become rigid around rules, or retreat emotionally when things feel uncertain, the child's nervous system encodes that as the appropriate response to threat. Not because anyone explained it, because the body learns by watching. Boomers were raised by people carrying invisible wounds, and those wounds became blueprints. But there was something else in the air besides trauma. There was expansion. The post-war economy was booming. Highways stretched across the country. Factories were hiring. The GI Bill sent millions to college. A single income could support a family. Loyalty to one company could mean a pension at the end of it. Stability wasn't just emotional, it was structural. And when a nervous system raised on scarcity meets a world offering opportunity, it does something predictable. It clings to the system that works. The childhood environment they grew up in reinforced everything. Neighborhood discipline was real. Respect for authority wasn't a suggestion, it was the social contract. You did not question your teacher, your father, your pastor, your president, not because people were cruel, but because that structure was the container holding everything together. In a world where the collective memory was still raw with war, hierarchy meant order, and order meant safety. Then came the Cold War, duck and cover drills in elementary school. Children being taught to hide under wooden desks as if that would protect them from a nuclear weapon. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. 13 days when the world genuinely held its breath and wondered if it would still exist by morning. These weren't abstract fears. They were drilled into the body through repetition, through broadcast warnings, through a culture that was quietly, collectively terrified. When you grow up believing the world can end tomorrow, stability becomes sacred, not as a value you choose. As a survival mechanism, your nervous system develops automatically. Safety stops being something you feel. It becomes something you build, brick by brick, rule by rule, dollar by dollar. And when you spend your childhood rehearsing the end of the world, predictability becomes more valuable than freedom. Order feels safer than experimentation. Longevity feels more trustworthy than rapid change. And then the world changed anyway. Elvis shook his hips on television, and parents turned it off in horror. The Beatles arrived, and everything shifted. Young boomers were caught between the world their parents built and the world that was rapidly replacing it. Civil rights marches turned violent. MLK was assassinated in 1968. RFK weeks later. Vietnam drafted their brothers, their classmates, their neighbors, and then sent some of them home in boxes, while others came back changed in ways nobody knew how to talk about. Watergate dismantled the last layer of institutional trust. Here is the psychological weight of that. You were told to trust authority, then watched authority fail catastrophically. You were told the system works, then watched the system lie. You were raised to believe that hard work and loyalty and following the rules would protect you, and then the rules changed mid-game. When trust in institutions collapses repeatedly, the brain learns one thing above all else. Do not outsource your safety. Build your own. Rely on your own effort. Anchor yourself in what you can control. The psychological response to that kind of repeated institutional collapse isn't cynicism, it's consolidation. When the outside world keeps proving itself unreliable, the mind does something elegant and self-protective. It turns inward. It builds its own system, its own values, its own definition of security. That's not rigidity, that's adaptation. But here's the part nobody tells you. The same coping mechanism that protected you in chaos can become the wall that keeps connection out in peace. The emotional restraint that helped a generation survive loss, uncertainty, and constant upheaval, that same restraint decades later looks like coldness, looks like an inability to communicate feelings, looks like dismissing the emotional needs of others because emotion, historically, was a luxury the nervous system couldn't afford. They were raised in a culture where therapy was weakness, where divorce was scandal, where men swallowed grief and women endured it quietly. Emotional control wasn't repression, it was competence. Vulnerability wasn't encouraged, it was risky. The nervous system learned. Emotions are not information to be explored. They are states to be managed, contained, returned to baseline as quickly as possible. That training doesn't disappear at 60. It becomes the water you swim in. Work became the container for all of it. If you couldn't name what you felt, you could build something, earn something, provide something. Work wasn't just income, it was identity. It was evidence of worth. It was the one place where effort had a clear relationship with outcome. And for a time, the economy reinforced that belief. Promotions were linear, retirement plans were real. Staying loyal often paid off. The system rewarded consistency. And when a system rewards a behavior, the brain encodes it as truth. In a world that felt chaotic and uncontrollable, the equation of hard work equals reward felt like solid ground. This is why the boomer relationship with work often looks, to younger generations, like an unhealthy obsession. But understand the psychology underneath it. When your sense of safety lives inside your productivity, when your identity is built on your output, retirement isn't just a life change, it's an existential one. And when culture begins to prioritize emotional expression over function, flexibility over structure, rapid change over stability, that doesn't just feel different. It feels destabilizing. And then the world accelerated. Technology compressed time, hierarchies flattened, authority became negotiable, emotional fluency became a currency. To a nervous system trained on structure, that doesn't feel progressive. It feels unstable. What looks like a generational divide is often something quieter. It's two different nervous systems shaped by two different worlds trying to exist in the same conversation. One shaped by expansion and emotional articulation, one shaped by scarcity and emotional efficiency. Neither is wrong. Both are adaptations. The boomer tendency toward hierarchy, toward deference to experience, toward skepticism of rapid change, these are not failures of imagination. They are the logical output of a brain trained to value what lasts. Trained to distrust what arrives too quickly, trained to believe that anything worth having requires sacrifice, not ease. And the frustration that younger generations feel, that too is understandable. When the framework someone uses to navigate life was built in a world that no longer exists, it creates friction, not because anyone is broken, because the map and the territory have diverged. You were raised by people who had seen the world fall apart and put it back together with their bare hands. You inherited their fear of losing what had been fought for, their insistence on structure, their discomfort with uncertainty, their belief that emotions, uncontrolled, lead to collapse. That inheritance shaped you before you had any say in the matter. The values felt like facts. The habits felt like instincts. The world you were given felt like the world as it is. None of that makes you wrong. It makes you human. The behaviors that frustrate others, the difficulty with certain conversations, the loyalty to structure, the discomfort with rapid change. They are not character flaws. They are the fingerprints of a life shaped by extraordinary times. You survived the uncertainty of a world that kept threatening to fall apart, and you built something stable in the middle of all of it. The world will always belong more to the generation currently building it, but every world rests on foundations poured by someone else. Before we dismiss the architecture, we should understand the weather it was designed to withstand. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to understand. If this challenged how you see that generation, or maybe even how you see your own parents, take a second and hit like. It tells me these conversations matter. And if you're part of this generation, or trying to understand it better, subscribe. Because we're not here to argue about generations. We're here to understand the psychology behind them. I'd really love to hear from you. Did this description feel accurate? What did growing up in that era teach you? And which generation should we unpack next? Gen X? Millennials? Or Gen Z? Tell me in the comments. I read more of them than you think. Sometimes the next video starts with one of yours.